Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast with Mike and Mike. Sales is a thinking process. This podcast will help you learn about what works in sales, how to hone your skills, and increase your success. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and in our recent episode with Ann Wolf, at the end of the episode, she mentioned the mismanagement of exits, and we got a lot of feedback on that, and we have the opportunity to talk to both Mike Simmons and Mike Connor today. So I want to bring that up. But first, hello, Mike and Mike.
Hey, Jody.
Well, we have this chance with both of you on the show. So I want to get your opinion because this turned out to be a topic people were interested in, a topic people were commenting on. What has your experience been, or Catalyst Sale as a whole? What have you experienced with this, with managing exits or mismanaging, however you want to talk about it? But it sure sparked some interest. So what has your experience been?
You know, the timing is kind of interesting because it's actually where I've spent a lot of my time most recently, is sort of going through that process and, not being part of it directly, but being a partner of a company that was being acquired, seeing both sides and not really being in either camp. It was really interesting to observe and see how we could add value for both sides as they went through, essentially an acquisition process that, lasted about 6 months or so, which was 6 times longer than anybody thought it would take. But just some observations really from both perspectives. I think that perspective may have been more about the founder and the exit and what to do or not to do, things like that. But also the acquiring company, if you're buying a startup, some ideas around what you might want to prepare yourself for, or really things to make a priority, not take for granted as you acquire a much smaller or an early stage company.
So Mike, what are some of those things that you don't want to take for granted?
Well, I think the biggest thing is there's, at least in this case I was just really intimately involved with, is that there's a lot of misperceptions about what an enterprise is and what they bring to the table. And then from the other direction, what a startup is and what they bring to the table. But the biggest thing was the cultural differences and the mindsets that are just so different between an early stage company that is either bootstrapped or is just starting to get some momentum, and then that large enterprise that has a lot of process and a lot of resources, but may not be as agile as they once were when they were an early stage company themselves. And just the disconnect between the expectations from both sides about how great this, perfect marriage could look like and why it makes total sense. And everybody gets all excited about it. But in all of that excitement, I think there's some things that get overlooked or certainly get deprioritized along the way. And then the effects of that.
Yeah, one of the pieces that jumps out at me just based on what you described there is the importance of communication and setting expectations. Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly part of it. I would say that the first thing that, now I'm going to switch back and forth both sides of the fence, right? From the startup, the founder perspective, and then the acquisition standpoint. But I would say when you talk about communication and making sure that expectations are set, certainly between the two parties that are negotiating the acquisition, that's, that is key. And we could probably make a whole episode about what to communicate, how much to communicate, when to communicate it. But I think the thing that got the first step that I think started to show this could be a bumpy ride was the amount of communication that happened internally in the organization that was being acquired. I know that we've even talked about this, I think, about transparency and communication and the importance of being completely transparent with everybody. And, but there's a danger in that if you're a small company that's, really managing resources and headcount very closely, that this can become a huge distraction. So the first thing that I sort of observed was over communication, where it just became consuming for everybody in the company, knowing what the outcome was going to be, how long it would take, what was the impact going to be for the individual. There was just too much information that was shared too soon. And I think that put the company in almost like a psychological holding pattern. Like, well, I don't want to make decisions today because it could be different once we're acquired and things like that. So decisions would get deferred. Things that would usually move very, very quickly, all of a sudden people had another filter to kind of work with to say, well, maybe we don't want to do this based on the company that's acquiring us. Maybe we should just put that on hold. And that's really what it did to the whole organization, was that uncertainty and not knowing what was going to happen longer term really became a momentum buster across the entire company, not just sales or anything like that, but across product and every area of the company.
Yeah. I mean, everybody first with that kind of communication, and we've talked about this, like you said, on the stuff around transparency, if you over communicate, you can create a lack of focus, a lack of misunderstanding, and then many assumptions that come in based on how certain things are going to impact. When Anne was on, one of the things she highlighted is that when you go through these discussions as a company, some of these things really have to be looked at as state secrets. They've got to be held very close to the vest internally so that the rest of the company that's being acquired can focus on executing on their objective to their customer base.
Yeah, exactly. And in the end, if you do have the disruption, or if you have confusion, or if you have concern and it starts to create these delays and stalls, ultimately it's just going to be a bad scenario for everybody, right? Because the reason you're attractive as an acquisition target is because you're on a growth trajectory. You're doing things in the market that are of value. And anything that you do to disrupt that momentum, ultimately, if this drags out for a period of time, if the performance of the company starts to suffer from that indecision, obviously then that creates, more doubt and problems down the line. And so, I'm not suggesting you have to keep everybody completely in the dark, but you can certainly run that risk of over communicating too soon. I think there's an appropriate time to kind of bring people into the fold. I mean, I'm not suggesting that, you keep everything so closely guarded that one day you show up to work and you find out you've been acquired the previous Friday. And that happens, but there's a balance there. And I think what I observed was just an over communication way, way too soon in the process. It's almost like the sales process, firing off a proposal after you've had one discovery meeting and you feel like, okay, this is going to close quick, so I'm just going to share everything. You definitely don't want to overshare.
Yeah, and you've got to understand the culture inside your organization and kind of how people are playing and what their capacity is for that kind of information. How about on the timing thing? Like you mentioned in this instance and instances that we've seen in other areas, the timing is never what they think it's going to be when they start. And I remember back to my days when I was just thinking about product development cycles, where product would say, we're going to roll something out in Q2, and automatically it adds 6 months to that. Can you talk a bit about your experience with timing and how organizations can handle that piece?
Yeah, I think it's like a lot of project plans. You should probably plan for the worst case scenario and give yourself plenty of runway to handle things like once you get a bunch of attorneys involved and you get the legal reviews and accountants are involved, there's a lot of due diligence. There's a lot of work that has to be done. And, really making sure that you allow yourself enough of a runway. In this case, it was assumed that it would only take a couple of months to happen because right out of the gate, the acquisition company had communicated that like, oh, this is really going to be straightforward. It's a small transaction, based on what we're accustomed to. And this should move really, really quickly. So, a couple months should be a done deal. 6 months later, it's like, wait a second, we've never actually acquired a company this small and the complexity, and we're not accustomed to this type of transaction. So it's actually taking us a little bit longer. So I don't know if it's like trying to forecast a sales opportunity. When you first start working on an engagement, you have some experience, how long an opportunity usually takes to move through a process. But in this case, and not only did it take longer than expected, but it seemed to be like a moving finish line. Like they would set a date, that would pass another 30 days out. And you could see that pattern of, continuous 30-day extensions of how long this should actually take. But yeah, we, figure that it's going to take forever. And then kind of related to that, but not directly related, was the thing that I kept, mentioning was both because of the focus issue and because of the timing issue, is that we still have to run a business. We still have to pay attention to what's happening today. And it was a conversation I had with the CEO about 4 or 5 months into it. I said, what's the backup plan here? If you can't come to terms or if things don't work out, Like, what does the next day look like when you find out the deal's it's fallen apart, they've walked away, and now we've got to operate? Like, what does that day one look like? And that was where the real concern started to surface, because everybody, I think, had already kind of bought into the fact that it was imminent that this was going to happen. And, the rest of it really wasn't going to matter, because this too shall pass and it eventually closes and away we go. But I never stopped operating like there was a finish line. And that's what I encourage everybody, particularly in the sales organization, to do, is to say, look, we know this is something that's happening right now. It's an active transaction. However, we need to treat it like we don't know when the deadline is. We don't know when the targets are. We just have to keep operating this company. Because in the end, that, staying on that path is going to be good for us, regardless if we're acquired or not, that we still have to run this like a company.
Yeah, and there are a couple of things that jump out at me as you describe that. One is application into sales process and project management in general. And we've talked about this before in the context of scope creep sucks. And so there's just this scope creep that can happen as new players get involved and new people get engaged and new questions come up. The other thing that is really important is this whole idea of how much risk there is, and being really clear about what the worst case scenario is and making sure you've got a plan to support that worst case scenario. When we talk about in the context of sales and managing pipeline and managing territory and managing your business, if you were limited to one deal to close, you have a significant amount of risk that you're not going to make your number, or significant amount of risk in making your number in that given year. So you mitigate that risk by having multiple deals out there. This is not a case where you can have, early on in the process, you may have multiple suitors, but this is not a case where as you go through various periods where you have multiple people who may purchase, you're limited to one. You are committed to a relationship. You've got to know that there's risk there. If you don't properly assess that risk and keep the business alive, you may ultimately be out of business, either because you were acquired or because you just have to fold because you can't continue.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And as things dragged on, that was really one of the discussions. It was like, okay, well, how much time is on the shot clock here? And how long can we operate the way we're operating? And if in fact the deal did fall apart, what kind of runway would we have if we had to start from basically picking up the pieces, if you will? And this particular scenario worked out very well. But I could say that one of the things that happened as time dragged on and people didn't see what the plan would be if things didn't work out favorably was people could see the writing on the wall to say, okay, we're going to hit a brick wall here if this doesn't go well. And what started happening then is you start losing key people. And in a small organization, you really can't afford to lose the key people that have gotten you that far. Because if you do end up with, okay, we've got to kind of regroup here and kind of reinvent ourselves and get back to what we do, when you have those key people gone, obviously that just creates one more setback that you're going to have to overcome.
So how do you avoid that? How do you avoid losing key people?
Well, in this case, it was the overcommunication. If people didn't feel that uncertainty right up front, I think they could have focused more on what needed to get done that day in their role in that job, right? So early on, knowing that, there's all kinds of change coming, and people start speculating about whether or not there'd be a job for them in the new company, people start to put out feelers, or they start to, communicate that to their network. And then before you know it, in a couple of cases, what ended up happening was even that uncertainty being shared amongst a personal network resulted in people saying, this person might become available here in a few months. We should probably talk to them. And all of that was just based on, speculation and fear that, hey, maybe there won't be a place for me in this new world, which then led to discussions about, well, maybe you should join our company, or, maybe you're open for a discussion where, a month ago when I met you for lunch, you had no intentions of making any kind of moves. Now maybe you're willing to listen. And so you just kind of put that risk out there that people have conversations they probably otherwise wouldn't have had.
Think about how delicate that balance is, that delicate balance between communicating, over communicating, setting expectation, making sure that everybody feels like they're part of this overarching thing and they understand what the goal is. And if there are gaps in any of those items, the next thing that happens is the people on the other side who are feeling those gaps start making assumptions.
Yep. Yeah, people will make up the story. If you don't tell people the whole story, they'll fill it in. I mean, that's just human nature, and we all do it, where, your mind wanders and you start to complete the story. And unfortunately, in some cases, we fill it with narrative that isn't exactly a positive outcome or whatever. We're fearing for the worst. So that's the piece that can really, get a group in trouble.
Really interesting perspective on the acquisition, not only from the standpoint of the company that's being acquired or is looking to divest, but also from the perspective of the company that may be making the acquisition. And we focused around communication and expectations. It reminds me of an experience that we went through, Mike, a number of years ago when we were with a company who acquired another organization. When they made that acquisition, I remember seeing the first charts where everything was going to be up and to the right. And it was amazing the linear growth that we were going to see as an organization. And I mean, my first view when I saw that chart was, crap, I can't believe people bought into that, because it didn't show any transition or any kind of seasonality or anything other than, hey, we're just going to be up and to the right. But I also remember a number of the assumptions about how that technology was going to be implemented into our customer base and and I remember having a conversation with a partner saying this technology was going to be used to go into a new market within a 6-month period, which was unrealistic. So what about that perspective? What about from the perspective of the company that's making the acquisition and is now figuring out, hey, we've got this technology, what do we do with it?
Yeah, that actually has been, and I'm living this right now, but I mean, one of the things that I've found really interesting is that I would have assumed that during all the due diligence, the months that had passed, that there actually would have been a really good integration strategy. And I think one of the things now, looking from, big company down to the startup that they're acquiring, this notion that, yes, you're a big machine. Yes, you have a lot of process. Yes, you have a lot of people and resources, but how is that going to integrate into your world? You have this team of people that are on a mission. And right out of the gate, you're converting that from you are on a mission, now you're in a role. And in our company, this is your role and this is what you do. And it kind of reminded me a little bit, I was telling the CEO this, that it reminded me a little bit about, this big company looked at your young startup and looked at you as a little bit of a golden goose. I mean, it's a profitable company. Certainly would be the return on capital was there. All the numbers were good. But it was this little golden goose. And as soon as the golden goose was, sort of transferred over, what started happening is people that manage necks took the neck of the goose. And then the people that manage wings took the wings off the goose. And then the people that manage feet took the feet off the goose. Well, before you know it, the goose is dead and it's not laying any golden eggs anymore. And I guess that's a crude analogy of how they took something that was a pretty fragile ecosystem and tried to ram it into a large enterprise approach without thinking about, well, is some of the parts of this company, is it a one-to-one fit into our current structure? The level of understanding of what they actually acquired was astounding to me, because I could see very clearly how it was a good acquisition and somebody had the right idea by doing this. But then the next step of, well, now what do we do with it? And how is it actually going to propel our larger business was severely lacking. And that's where it became really interesting to me, because I thought, wow, they've actually done something really good here. And overall, the transaction is great for both sides. The startup had grown to a point where it either needed capital or they needed to do something to put it on the right trajectory. So they'd kind of run its course as far as they could take it. And it was at a perfect point in time to be acquired. Same thing with a large company. They had some gaps in their solutions business that this could definitely address. But I don't think either side looked at it that holistically. I think they looked at it as a transaction to say, okay, well, it's a chance for us to sort of tap out. And the acquiring company was like, yeah, this is this little company that if we just throw a bunch of resources at it, it'll grow and we'll get our return on capital within a couple of years. Sounds like a good deal. But then operationally, how's this really going to happen? And could this actually be something that would be more valuable to us as a solution set integrated properly into our company versus just trying to drive
organic growth with the founders and taking the company from the get-go.
Yeah, I think about taking the wheels off your Mini and putting it on my Jeep. I might be able to go a little bit faster. And this is why I shouldn't talk about cars. Just like, I can't believe we had a basketball reference. I think that's the first basketball reference we've had on the podcast when you were talking about shot clock going down. But if you take those pieces, it doesn't mean that you're just going to be able to plug them in and that's going to accelerate something. There has to be an integration strategy when you're going through this kind of activity. And in order to have an integration strategy, an effective strategy, you've got to get perspective from multiple stakeholders inside the organization. And I mean, we talk about this as a guiding principle of ours, but not limiting ourselves based on preconceived notions. Don't have these preconceived notions about how something's going to fit. I mean, to Mike's point, once you take the stomach out of the golden goose, and I don't know much about geese, but once you take the stomach out, it's going to have a hard time producing those things. So, Mike, as we kind of wrap up here, is there anything else that you want to leave, our audience with when they think about either things from the perspective of an employee who's part of a company who's being acquired, a founder who is divesting or selling off the company, or the acquisition partner, the acquiring company who's getting ready to acquire this capability? If you could hit on all three of those, I think that'd be a good way to wrap up.
For the trifecta, I would say my parting thought would be the other thing that probably would have helped both sides would be not looking at the negotiation or the transaction as a win, as we have to win this negotiation. Saying I've got to win says somebody's got to lose. The willingness, when we talked about transparency and communicating honestly, we talked about it from the how do you overshare information. I think being perfectly transparent about where you are as a business and setting the right expectations is also really important for both sides, because after the day of the close, that's when the skeletons come out of the closet. That's when the reality hits. And that's when, people really get concerned about what just happened in this sort of transaction. And so I think there's a tendency to not want to overshare, or there's a tendency to let's do the things that, make us look as attractive as possible. But if you're looking for the long-term success, particularly in this case where the anticipation is this is a way to grow a company, be pretty upfront about the realities of where the company's at. And don't be afraid to share, the real samples or the examples of what's happening in the business. I think if you're too guarded with information, or if you're not transparent about things, that sends a signal that is just going to create delays. And then the delays become your problem because now you're on the wrong track, you're losing your momentum, and it just spirals in a direction that's not good for either party. So I think one of the things that could have shortened the timeline on this particular transaction would have been upfront, very candid discussions about the things like, simple things like the pipeline and what's really happening and things like that. Just being really upfront about that and not just trying to put window dressing on things and make it look attractive for acquisition, because that can get sniffed out very quickly.
So I think as we close up, a couple of things from my end. One is the employees inside the organization, do your job, stay focused, deliver on your role, try to minimize the noise or minimize the distraction and how it impacts you. As the founder of the company, don't forget about your customers. Remember, and we went through this entire discussion, we really didn't talk about customer impact, but you don't forget about your customers and your employees. You are responsible for them, not just moving this transaction forward. And as the company who's making the acquisition, minimize the number of assumptions that you make and leverage the collective intelligence you have inside your organization properly to help you identify the blind spots that might exist as you're going through that acquisition process.
Mike and Mike, this has been a tremendous conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, you can find us on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, or any podcast app you might use to listen to podcasts. You can also find all the back episodes of the Catalyst Sale podcast at catalystsale.com. Thank you so much, Mike and Mike, and thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale podcast.